Imagine a world where your choice of breakfast could land you in a dungeon, or your height is a matter of national security. For thousands of years, humans have been remarkably gifted at inventing rules that make absolutely zero sense. From ancient empires to modern municipalities, we have legislated the impossible and criminalized the ridiculous. Today, we are counting down 50 of the most baffling and dumb laws ever conceived. Prepare for a masterclass in legal insanity that will leave you questioning everything. 1. Ancient Sparta had a unique way of dealing with men who preferred the single life for too long. If you weren't married by a certain age, the law required you to undergo a humiliating public ritual. During the coldest part of winter, bachelors were forced to walk around the city marketplace wearing nothing but a thin tunic while singing a song about how their lack of a wife was a justified punishment for their laziness. It was public shaming as a matter of national policy. Does this make your current dating life seem a bit more manageable? 2. In ancient Egypt, the status of a house cat was somewhere between a beloved pet and a literal deity. Killing a cat, even by complete accident, was treated as a major crime that could lead to severe legal exile or worse. Legend has it that when a house caught fire, the residents were legally expected to prioritize saving the cats before rescuing their own furniture or valuables. It is the ultimate historical proof that humans have been subservient to cats for millennia. Are you serving your cat well enough to stay out of the government's crosshairs? 3. In Japan, the Metaboat law makes your waistline a matter of national policy. Companies must measure the waists of employees aged 40 to 74. If they exceed legal limits, the company faces heavy fines. It's a state-mandated diet enforced by HR. Imagine your boss sitting you down for a performance review, not because of your sales, but because your belt is too tight. Would you stay at a job that legally required you to stay thin just to save the firm from a government penalty? 4. In the Italian town of Eraclea, building sandcastles on the beach is a punishable offense. The local authorities argue that these sandy structures block the path of lifeguards and create a tripping hazard for the public. It effectively turns every 6-year-old with a bucket into a potential criminal and a threat to coastal order. Imagine spending hours on a perfect moat, only to have a police officer order its immediate demolition for lack of a building permit. Does this make you feel like your local beach rules are actually quite reasonable in comparison? 5. In the Qin dynasty of China, your legal adulthood wasn't determined by your birthday, but by your physical height. Emperor Qin Shi Huang was quite short, and he decreed that only those who reached roughly 4 feet 11 inches could be prosecuted as adults in court. If you were short, you were legally a child regardless of your actual age. This led to grown men carrying height certificates and desperately trying to look shorter to avoid taxes or military service. It is likely the only time in history where being short was a legitimate tax loophole. 6. During China's Qin dynasty, masculinity was a matter of state security. Men were strictly forbidden from crying, especially during legal proceedings or mourning. If caught shedding tears, a man was labeled weak and potentially seditious, facing punishments as humiliating as having his beard and eyebrows shaved off as a mark of shame. It was a literal, "stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about" policy. It remains a striking example of toxic masculinity being written directly into a criminal code. 7. Frederick the Great of Prussia absolutely despised the growing popularity of coffee, preferring his subjects stick to good old-fashioned beer. He didn't just tax it, he hired a literal task force known as coffee smellers. These were war veterans whose sole legal duty was to patrol the streets and sniff the air for the scandalous scent of roasting beans. If they caught a whiff of a latte, they'd track down the source and slap the owner with a massive fine. Is there any beverage you love enough to risk a government-certified sniffer knocking on your front door? 8. The Code of Hammurabi is famous for its eye for an eye justice, but it was particularly brutal regarding the quality of local nightlife. If a tavern owner was caught watering down the beer or overcharging customers, the legal penalty was incredibly severe, often resulting in the owner being cast into the nearest river. They took the concept of quality control very literally in ancient Mesopotamia. It makes you wonder how modern bars would change if serving a flat soda carried a heavy sentence. Do you think we'd finally get the premium service we pay for? 9. For centuries, French and English law upheld the royal touch, a belief that the king could cure skin diseases just by touching the afflicted. While not a law you could break, it was a legally mandated state ritual that the monarch was required to perform for his subjects. Thousands of sick people would line up, and the king had to spend hours physically touching them as part of his official duties. It was a bizarre intersection of public health and divine right, where the ruler's hands were treated like a government-certified pharmacy. Thoughts and prayers used to be a budget line. 10. In the ancient Greek city-state of Megara, the authorities once passed a law that banned all expensive weddings. They were worried that the middle class was spending too much money on lavish ceremonies to keep up with the elites, leading to a massive private debt crisis. The law dictated everything from the number of guests allowed to the specific price of the bride's dress. It was the original Bridezilla Prevention Act. If the government told you today that your wedding budget was capped at the price of a used bicycle, would you still say I do? 11. In 1571, the English Parliament decided your head was a billboard for the wool industry. Every male over 6, excluding nobles, was legally required to wear a wool cap on Sundays and holidays. Getting caught with a bare head or a fancy silk hat resulted in a daily fine. It was a government-mandated dress code designed to bail out struggling sheep farmers. Imagine being legally forced to wear a specific hat every single weekend just to save a failing corporation. 12. Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, the dog shogun of 17th century Japan, took pet ownership to a terrifying extreme. His laws of compassion made harming any animal a capital offense. He built luxury kennels for strays while his people starved, and one man was executed just for accidentally hitting a dog with a stone. It's a wild example of what happens when a ruler's obsession becomes law. If you were in charge, what weird hobby of yours would you make mandatory for the whole country? 13. Since the reign of Napoleon, a law has existed in France making it technically illegal to name your pig Napoleon. This was enacted to protect the emperor's dignity from being associated with a farm animal. While the law hasn't been enforced in ages, it has never been officially repealed. In the eyes of the French legal code, the reputation of a pig is still a matter of high-level national security. It's a hilarious reminder of just how fragile a dictator's ego can be, even centuries after he's gone. 14. In medieval Iceland, being a romantic could land you in serious legal trouble. The Grágás law code strictly forbade writing love poetry about a person without their family's express permission. To them, a poem wasn't a sweet gesture. It was viewed as seductive magic or a form of social defamation. If you were caught composing a sonnet for a crush, you faced heavy fines or even banishment. Imagine needing to clear your DMs with a legal team before hitting send. Does this make the stress of modern dating feel a bit more manageable? 15. In the 1800s, the British government was terrified of the incredible speed of early cars. They passed the Locomotive Act, capping speeds at a blistering 4 miles per hour. The kicker? Every car had to be preceded by a man walking 60 yards ahead, waving a red flag to warn pedestrians. This effectively made cars slower than a brisk walk and turned innovation into a legal nightmare. It's the ultimate historical example of bureaucracy trying to put the brakes on the future. 16. Ancient Athens had a legal system that was fair to everyone, except inanimate objects. If a falling roof tile or a statue caused a death, the object was put on trial in a special court. If found guilty, the item was formally banished from the city and thrown into the sea to remove blood guilt. It's the ultimate example of literally blaming the messenger. If you could put one annoying household object on trial today, which one would you sentence to permanent exile? 17. In British-ruled India, the government tried to solve a cobra infestation by offering a cash bounty for every dead snake. This backfired when locals started breeding cobras in their backyards to collect the reward. When the government found out and canceled the bounty, the breeders released their now worthless snakes into the streets. The result? The cobra population ended up way higher than when they started. This is now known as the Cobra Effect, the perfect term for when a dumb law makes the problem it's trying to solve exponentially worse. 18. Ancient Sparta didn't just regulate your training, they regulated your waistline. Every 10 days, the city's youth had to stand naked before high officials for a mandatory body inspection. If a young man appeared soft or unfit, he was publicly shamed and beaten as punishment for his perceived laziness. The Spartans believed a fat citizen was a useless soldier, making fitness a legal requirement for survival. If your local government started mandatory weigh-ins today, how many of us would pass? 19. In 1797, the British government decided that knowing the time was a taxable luxury. They passed the clock and watch tax, requiring owners of timepieces to pay an annual fee just for the privilege of knowing the hour. The law was so hated that people stopped buying watches, nearly destroying the industry in months. To help, pubs began installing massive wall clocks so people could check the time for free. It's a wild example of the state trying to put a price tag on time itself. If you had to pay a subscription to check your phone's clock, would you pay or just guess the hour? 20. In ancient Athens, skipping a political meeting wasn't just lazy, it was a legal liability. To ensure everyone attended the assembly, officials would sweep through the marketplace holding a long rope dipped in wet red paint. If you were caught loitering and the rope touched your clothes, you were marked with a bright red stain of shame. This red badge of laziness meant you had to pay a fine and were publicly outed as a slacker. It was the ultimate way to force people to care about local politics. If your government started using red paint to get you to vote, would you show up or just buy a lot of laundry detergent? 21. If you've ever played Ding Dong Ditch, you've committed a crime London police have tracked since 1839. Under the Metropolitan Police Act, it is illegal to willfully disturb a resident by ringing a doorbell or knocking without a lawful excuse. While it sounds like a harmless prank, Victorian authorities viewed it as a serious breach of peace that required a magistrate's attention. It's one of the few laws that targets annoying teenagers specifically to protect the public's sanity. Is there a prank you think deserves a fine? 22. For 24 years, the humble potato was a legal outcast in France. From 1748 to 1772, Parliament banned spuds because they believed the vegetable caused leprosy. It took pharmacist Antoine-Augustin Parmentier to change the law by planting a field and surrounding it with armed guards. He knew that making something look exclusive would make everyone want to steal it. Soon, the leprosy vegetable was the hottest snack in Paris, proving marketing is more powerful than any decree. 23. During Oliver Cromwell's 17th century rule, your Christmas dinner would have been a crime scene. His Puritan government legally banned mince pies on Christmas Day, viewing them as symbols of excess. Soldiers were even authorized to enter homes and seize any festive pastries they found. It was a literal war on dessert that turned every grandmother with a rolling pin into a potential revolutionary. Imagine a SWAT team busting down your door because they smelled cinnamon and nutmeg in the air. 24. In 18th century Prussia, King Frederick William III had a legal obsession so bizarre it turned his army into a literal collection. He created the Potsdam Giants, a regiment where every soldier had to be at least 6 feet tall. To fill the ranks, he passed laws allowing his agents to kidnap tall men from across Europe. He even tried to legally breed tall soldiers by forcing giants to marry tall women. It was the first time in history where being vertically gifted made you a target for state-sponsored kidnapping. Do you think you'd still want to be tall if it meant being drafted into a king's personal toy collection? 25. France has a law that makes "till death do us part" sound like a minor administrative suggestion. Under Article 171 of the Civil Code, it is legally possible to marry a deceased person. To do this, you must prove the couple intended to marry before the death and obtain personal approval from the president. It's a strange, bittersweet piece of legislation that treats the afterlife like a hurdle you can clear with enough paperwork. Would you marry the love of your life even if they couldn't actually attend? 26. In the city of Milan, an ancient local ordinance technically requires citizens to smile at all times in public. The only legal exceptions to this happy law are for people in hospitals or at funerals. While you won't see smile police handing out tickets today, the law remains officially on the books. It was originally intended to make the city seem more welcoming, but it mostly proves you can't legally mandate a good mood. How long would you last before being fined for looking a bit too cynical? 27. According to a persistent Scottish tradition, if a stranger knocks on your door and asks to use your toilet, you are legally required to let them in. While modern experts argue this is more of a myth than a statute, many Scots treat it as a point of national honor. It turns your private bathroom into a quasi-public utility for any passing hiker with an emergency. Would you be comfortable letting a complete stranger into your home just because an old custom said it was the right thing to do? 28. Medieval England had a legal procedure that sounds like a deadly game of snacks: the trial by morsel. If a member of the clergy was accused of a crime, they were forced to eat a piece of consecrated bread or cheese. The logic was that if they were guilty, God would cause them to choke on the spot. If they swallowed it smoothly, they were free. It basically turned every court case into a high-stakes, competitive eating contest where the jury was a slice of sourdough. If your legal fate depended on a single bite of a sandwich, would you trust your own throat to prove your innocence? 29. For decades, Sweden had a strict rule about spontaneous dancing in public spaces. Bars and restaurants were legally required to have a dancing permit if they wanted patrons to move to the music. If a catchy song came on and customers started swaying without the paperwork, the owner could be fined or lose their liquor license. It turned every foot tap and hip sway into a potential legal violation. It sounds like the plot of a movie, but with more meatballs and better designed furniture. 30. Venice is famous for its black gondolas, but their uniform color is the result of a 16th century legal crackdown. At the time, wealthy Venetians were competing to see who could decorate their boats with the most gold leaf and expensive silks. To stop this wasteful spending and end the social rivalry, the government decreed that every gondola must be painted a standard, somber black. It was the ultimate eat-the-rich fashion law that leveled the playing field on the canals forever. Do we need similar laws for luxury cars today? 31. In the Norwegian town of Longyearbyen on the Svalbard archipelago, it is technically illegal to die. This isn't because the local government has discovered the secret to eternal life, but because the intense permafrost prevents bodies from decomposing. This keeps deadly viruses, like the 1918 Spanish flu, perfectly frozen and potentially active for centuries. If you are nearing the end of your life, the law requires you to be flown to the mainland for your final moments to avoid a biological disaster. It is a bizarre case of biology forcing a town to ban the inevitable. If you lived in a place where death was against the law, would you feel immortal or just really stressed about the logistics? 32. For centuries in early Rome, women were legally forbidden from drinking wine. The law was so severe that a husband was authorized to execute his wife if she was caught with a cup of red. To enforce this, Roman men performed a breathalyzer test by kissing female relatives on the mouth to sniff for fermented grapes. This turned every family greeting into a life-or-death inspection. Do you think you could survive a week without your favorite drink if it were a capital offense? 33. Since 1839, London has maintained a legal war on fun via the Metropolitan Police Act. Section 54 specifically makes it a crime to fly a kite or slide on ice in any public street. Originally meant to stop horses from spooking and to keep sidewalks clear, the law remains active today. You could be a perfect citizen, but the moment you launch a kite in a London street, you're technically a public nuisance. It's a strange relic from a time when the state viewed a simple toy as a threat to order. 34. The legendary Athenian lawmaker Solon introduced a law that would be the absolute nightmare of every modern graduate: a legal mandate against idleness. If a citizen could not prove they had a steady source of income or a productive trade, they could be prosecuted by the community. The punishment for being a repeat professional slacker was the loss of your voting rights and a hefty fine. Essentially, the government made it illegal to just vibe. Imagine if the unemployment office didn't just give you a check, but instead hauled you to court for having too much free time. 35. Medieval England had a massive loophole known as the benefit of clergy. Originally for priests, it eventually let anyone who could read a specific Bible verse, usually Psalm 51, be tried in lenient church courts instead of secular ones. Since church courts never used the death penalty, literacy became a literal get-out-of-jail-free card. In a world where most crimes led to the gallows, reading was survival. If a single sentence stood between you and the executioner, how fast would you learn to read? 36. The Athenian ruler Draco is famous for harsh codes, but his weirdest law targeted the lazy. If a man was found with no visible income or spent too much time wandering without purpose, he could be prosecuted for idleness. Draco's preferred penalty? Death. Later reformers lowered the fine, but the message was clear. Produce for the state or pay with your life. It's the original hustle culture backed by an executioner. Do you think our society would be more productive if taking a nap was a crime? 37. In 18th century France, bread was a matter of national security, regulated by a specialized bread police. The government strictly controlled the price, weight, and ingredients of every loaf. If a baker sold a short loaf or used bad flour, he could be dragged into the street and publicly shamed. The king was the first baker of the kingdom, and a bad harvest often meant a legal collapse of the state. It proves that when people are hungry, even the best regulations won't save a monarchy from a revolution. 38. In the 1660s, England introduced the hearth tax, a levy based on the number of fireplaces in your home. To avoid the tax, poor families began bricking up their chimneys, leading to smoke-filled houses with zero ventilation. Even worse, collectors known as chimneymen had the legal right to enter your home at any time to count your hearths. It was a massive invasion of privacy that turned a cozy fireplace into a symbol of government overreach and a major legal liability. 39. Imagine being taxed just for trying to stay clean. For 135 years, Great Britain treated soap as a luxury, slapping it with a tax that nearly doubled its price. To prevent theft and tax evasion, manufacturers had to lock their soap pans at night. This turned basic hygiene into a black market struggle for the poor, who often had to choose between food and soap. Do you think the government should have a say in how often you wash your hands, or is that taking clean living way too far? 40. Ancient Rome made it illegal to mourn for enemies of the state. If a general was executed for treason, his family was legally forbidden from wearing black or crying in public. To do so was seen as an act of political defiance against the Roman spirit. It was the government's way of ensuring history and emotion was controlled by the winners. It proves that even private grief can be regulated if the state thinks your tears are a threat to the national narrative. Imagine being told by the law exactly who you are allowed to miss. 41. In 18th century Spain, King Charles III passed a law banning long capes and wide-brimmed hats. He believed these clothes allowed criminals to hide their identities and weapons in the dark streets of Madrid. The law triggered the Escalage riots, where the public took to the streets to defend their right to wear whatever they wanted. It is one of the few times in history where a fashion choice led to a full-scale national revolt. If the government suddenly banned your favorite hoodie for security reasons, would you comply, or would you start a revolution? 42. In Vermont, a bizarrely specific old law once made it illegal for a husband and wife to whisper to each other while in bed. The exact rationale for this has been lost to history, but it remains a stunning example of the state trying to stick its nose into the most private moments of life. What could be so threatening about a whispered secret between spouses that it required a legal ban? Whatever those couples were discussing, it must have been a massive conspiracy to make the lawmakers that nervous. 43. The Philippines has a legal weapon specifically designed to stop the town gossip in their tracks. Under the revised penal code, the act of intriguing against honor is a punishable offense that criminalizes spreading unverified rumors that damage someone's reputation. Local slang calls a gossip a marites, and this law is essentially the government's official anti-marites tool. It is probably the only country in the world where spilling the tea on your neighbor could actually land you in a courtroom with a judge. If your group chat were suddenly subject to Philippine law, how many of your friends would be looking at community service? 44. The Levitical laws of ancient Israel contained a fashion restriction that would effectively bankrupt most modern clothing stores: the prohibition of chatnez. This law strictly forbade wearing any garment made of both wool and linen woven together. While the theological reasons were deeply complex, the legal reality was absolute for every citizen. You could wear pure wool or pure linen, but combining them in one shirt made you a legal pariah. Have you checked your clothing labels lately, or are you currently walking around as a secret fashion criminal? 45. In 14th century Venice, the city authorities valued their peace and quiet so much they turned the snooze button into a matter of state security. It was legally forbidden for any citizen to ring a bell at night unless there was an active fire or a literal invasion. The penalty wasn't just a warning. It could include a massive fine or a public lashing. They essentially criminalized being a morning person or a late-night enthusiast. Imagine living in a city where a single accidental chime could lead to a court date and a very public whipping. 46. Since 1839, it has been technically illegal in London to carry a plank of wood along a sidewalk. According to the Metropolitan Police Act, transporting timber, ladders, or even a large wheel on a public footway is forbidden unless you are loading a vehicle. The goal was to stop construction projects from blocking busy Victorian pedestrians, but the law is still active today. You could be a perfect citizen until the moment you try to carry some plywood home from the hardware store. 47. For over 9 centuries, the English town of Dunmow has hosted a bizarre tradition called the Dunmow Flitch. A married couple can stand trial before a jury of bachelors to prove they have lived in perfect harmony for a year and a day without a single argument. If they win, they are paraded through the streets and awarded a flitch, a massive side of bacon. It is the ultimate English reward. Marital bliss isn't worth a trophy, but it is definitely worth a lifetime supply of breakfast meat. Could you and your partner stay silent for a year to win some bacon? 48. In 1784, Great Britain launched the hat tax, turning your wardrobe into a mandatory government revenue stream. Every men's hat required an official government stamp on the lining to prove the tax was paid. If you were caught without one, the fines were massive. It forced milliners to act as tax collectors and even threatened forgers with the gallows. It's a wild example of the state finding a way to tax your literal head. If you had to pay a monthly fee just to wear your favorite baseball cap today, would you go bareheaded or pay up? 49. For centuries, English law utilized a principle called mortmain, or the dead hand. This prevented people from leaving land to non-dying entities like the church in their wills. The government feared that if the church owned all the land, it would never be sold or taxed again, freezing the economy forever. It was a law designed to stop the dead hand of the past from controlling the wealth of the living. It proves that even death doesn't stop the state from worrying about its tax revenue. All right, we've covered 49 points of pure legal madness, and only one remains. But before we reveal our grand finale, it's time for the final verdict. In our opinion, the award for the single most ridiculous law on today's list goes to Milan's mandatory smiling law. It is the absolute peak of bureaucratic absurdity to think you can legislate human emotion. The fact that you are legally required to be happy unless you are visiting a hospital or a funeral is just pure, unadulterated nonsense. It's a law that tries to manufacture a welcoming atmosphere by threatening citizens with a fine for simply having a bad day. You literally can't make this stuff up. Do you agree with our choice, Or did the legal requirement to let a stranger use your bathroom in Scotland win it for you? Let us know in the comments what you think. And now, our final number. 50. The 12 tables of ancient Rome didn't just worry about debt or property, they were terrified of poets. The law stated that if a person wrote a satirical or defamatory poem about another citizen, something they called a carmen famosum, the punishment was death. You could literally be beaten to death for writing a mean limerick or a catchy insult about someone in power. It was the ultimate original form of cancel culture. A society so afraid of a sick burn that they made it a capital offense, proving that throughout history, the pen really has been far more dangerous than the sword. It turns out that having the authority to write the rules doesn't mean you have the common sense to follow logic. From ancient empires to modern cities, the human gift for creating total absurdity seems to have no limits. If you were a ruler for just one day, what is one totally harmless thing you would make legally mandatory for everyone? Tell us your most creative ideas in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey through legal madness, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on the strangest parts of our history. Thanks for watching and stay out of trouble.